Hello there. So what I'll do in this third part is give a brief overview of what philosophy is, since I'd imagine that a fair number of you haven't taken a philosophy class before or haven't read a whole lot of philosophy on your own. And then give an overview of what moral philosophy in particular is, since that's what this course is after all about. So let's go ahead and move on to that. Um, it turns out that it's notoriously difficult to give a satisfying definition of philosophy. I want to start, though, with a sort of rough attempt. So, in the sense it's important for our purposes, it doesn't mean something like worldview. In colloquial or popular usage, you often hear people say things like, well, our company's philosophy. What they mean there is something like worldview, approach. It's just not capturing what philosophy as a discipline is about. I think that's probably obvious. So it's better defined as the pursuit of wisdom, knowledge, or understanding. And that makes sense when you reflect on the Greek meaning of the word. So it comes from philo and Sophie, philo meaning love and Sophie meaning wisdom. So literally, philosophy means love of wisdom or love of knowledge, pursuit of knowledge. That kind of captures it a little bit better. Aristotle said that philosophy begins in wonder. This sort of comports pretty well with the image that you might have of a philosopher, right? Somebody, some old man sitting in a chair with a beard, sort of off in space, just wondering or contemplating, right? But there is one important qualification to this, and that's that, philosophy as it's practiced in the university or in an academic setting is structured wondering. It's not this sort of, caricature of philosophy that, people think that it's, philosophers speak in aphorisms or these, deep little statements or thoughts. In fact, academic philosophers pride themselves on, sort of honing the resources of rationality so that their wondering is structured. It's reasoned and careful, has a distinct purpose, and the purpose is bound up with rationality. The idea is to understand the world through reason or rationality. One way of thinking about what it is you're going to be doing in this course is clarifying some of your core beliefs, to understand them fully and to be able to defend them in a more competent manner than the average person does without philosophical training. So in our case, that has to do with beliefs about morality, about right and wrong. So the goal is to clarify, understand, and defend those beliefs rationally in a more rigorous manner than we're able to do before having the philosophical toolkit at our disposal. So I remember when I took my first philosophy class, my professor said something like this. He said, all it takes to be a philosopher is just to read philosophy and think about and critically engage the philosophy that you're reading. That's all that there is to being a philosopher, right? So, and then he said, that means that you'll all be philosophers throughout this course. And I remember shrugging that off, thinking, well, that's just absurd, but it's true. There's nothing over and above that that's necessary to be a philosopher. So you will all be philosophers as you're engaging in this course and working through this material, because Being a philosopher just means reading, thinking about, and writing philosophy, and you'll be doing all of those things. Here's a quote that I think, if I recall, is from the University of Texas at Austin's philosophy department website. I don't remember if that's where I found this. It's been a while, but I like the quote. So it returns to that theme about wonder, and does a good job of articulating the theme. So it says, philosophy is one of the oldest and most enduring human intellectual enterprises. It begins in wonder at the richness, order, and beauty of the world around us. Also, wonder at the grandeur and horror of the acts we perpetrate, and not least, wonder at the mystery and elusiveness of our own nature. But it doesn't stop there. Philosophers reflect on all these matters, trying to understand the world and themselves. You might have noticed that these attempts I've made so far to define philosophy as an area of inquiry are less than totally satisfying. We haven't yet given a very precise definition of what philosophy actually is, and that's, like I indicated earlier, a pretty notorious difficulty. It's hard to define the field in any very precise way. So what I think works as a better approach is to just talk about the various branches of philosophy, to talk about the kinds of questions that different areas of philosophy are attempting to answer, and I think that functions better as an attempt to get a handle on what philosophers are actually doing. So I've got this chart here. These indicate the subfields of philosophy. So on the left, we have logic. I don't know why metaphysics and epistemology are in red. I meant to put moral philosophy and political philosophy in red in order to indicate that these are the areas we will be concerned with in this course. But so you have those two in aesthetics together with moral and political. Moral, incidentally, is divided into three subfields within this subfield of philosophy, namely normative, meta, and applied ethics. We'll talk a little bit about these three different subfields of moral philosophy as we progress, but the distinction isn't terribly important for present purposes. So let's just break down the different subfields on this diagram. Let's start with epistemology. What this is a big word. It just means the theory of knowledge. So this is an area of philosophy that's concerned with figuring out what we can know. Oops, didn't mean to do that. So is knowledge of anything really possible? Think of a matrix type situation. Might we just be dreaming, or brains in a vat, or in the matrix, and so forth? And is the knowledge that we do have certain, or is it impossible maybe to have certain knowledge that couldn't possibly be mistaken? Also, epistemology is concerned with the nature of justification. So what does it mean to be justified in one's belief? I take it that I'm justified in believing that I am sitting at a desk right now. I wouldn't be nearly as justified in believing that I'm on Mars. So where does the difference lie? What does it take for one to have justification in one's beliefs? Okay, next, metaphysics. This is perhaps the most abstract of all philosophical subfields. It's concerned with questions such as what is the ultimate nature of reality? What exists? I mean, those are the most broad kind of abstract questions one can ask. To make it a little more concrete, I'll give you an example. One type of metaphysical question concerns whether God exists. So that would go under this category here. What exists? Well, one thing that we might want to know if it exists is God. Other metaphysical questions concern do we have free will as human beings, or are we in some way causally determined so that we cannot act freely, even though it seems like we do? Moral philosophy is concerned with the nature of morality, right? What's right and what's wrong? How ought we to live? And are morals objective, or do we in some way create them? This is going to be one of the two areas that or investigating in this course, and the other is political philosophy. So what is justice, or what are the correct principles of justice? And then finally, logic is concerned with the correct principles of reasoning. We'll talk a bit more about that in the next video when we discuss some of the basic principles of logic and argumentation. So it's these two. Well, I guess I got a little bit ahead of myself. Let's ask, first of all, what it is that ties all of these subfields together, these right here. They're all philosophical subfields, but what makes them all philosophical? And I think the answer to the question is that they all involve the examination of fundamental beliefs that we have, fundamental beliefs about the world. And incidentally, these beliefs tend to be ones that underpin other areas, other academic areas like physics and political science. I won't say much more about that, but as a discipline, philosophy tends, and it has this reputation, it tends to address questions that are often difficult and big. And so if you look back at this list, it seems like a lot of these are big questions, deep, difficult questions, right? Maybe that's one thing that unifies all of them. One thing I want to mention is that because of their size, because of how difficult and big they are, these kinds of questions, philosophical questions, investigating them requires that we clarify the concepts that are involved and define our terms carefully. To give you an example that's relevant to this course, when we ask this philosophical question, is killing always wrong, we're going to need to know, among other things, what we mean by wrong, right? Because if we don't even know what it means to say that something is wrong, surely we can't answer the question, is killing always wrong? And that's just one example of a major theme in philosophy, and that's that most philosophical questions, answering them begins with an effort to define the terms involved. You'll see that in our readings, and it's a trend that's become much more prominent in more contemporary philosophy, and we won't be dealing really with contemporary philosophy in this course, more historical, stretching all the way back to antiquity, but it's not just contemporary philosophers that are concerned with this clarification of concepts and definition of terms. That's part and parcel of the nature of philosophy. So you should come into it expecting to see philosophers laboring over what some term means, arguing that this is the proper way of defining it or understanding it, and so forth. Okay, right, so here are our branches again. It is these two, moral and political, that we'll be concerned with in this course. Okay, this is not quite working out the way it was supposed to. Wow, that is horrible. That animation is totally wrong. My apologies. But the illustration here is supposed to be, I'm trying to explain why the course has the name that it does. Since we're doing moral and political philosophy in this course, it's altogether fitting that there be a name representing that, right? So moral philosophy gets you the virtue part. Political philosophy, being concerned with justice, gets you the justice part. So justice and virtue is the name of the course because we're doing political and moral. Okay. Now I've said that this is a course in moral and political philosophy, as I'm sure you're by now aware. But I want to use a kind of illustration to make it clear just what moral philosophy is. I've said something now about what philosophy is in general, but let's focus on what ethics or moral philosophy is all about. So what I want to do is use a kind of off-the-wall or sort of extreme illustration or example in order to drive home the point. So this is going to be more of a wild kind of example than the sort of situations you're likely to find yourself in your everyday life, where you will encounter a whole host of moral dilemmas and situations that are morally charged. But this is also a morally relevant kind of situation, and it's one that I think will serve to drive home the point. And what I want to talk about is a case of a terrorist. Okay, so here's what I want you to imagine. Imagine that a terrorist has abducted you, right, just right off the street. And when he abducted you, he abducted another person off the street, a stranger, somebody you don't know. Okay. And he's taken you to an abandoned warehouse or something like that, and has tied you to a chair and tied the other individual to a chair. Now, before filling in the rest of the details, I need to pause and indicate a couple of assumptions that need to be in force here in order for this example to work. So assume these things. Assume that, well, first of all, that the terrorist is a bad person. He's morally bankrupt. He's got a bad character, and he's going to do something morally bad, which I'll share with you in a moment. But more importantly, assume that the person who was abducted with you, the stranger, is a totally morally praiseworthy person, somebody who has the same moral character that you do, say. So this isn't a bad person. Suppose you can be confident of that. Okay? Now here's what I want you to imagine. So the terrorist tells you, I'm going to give you two choices. Here's one. I have this complicated machine. It's, it delivers a charge of electricity or something. It's connected to the stranger, and you can press a button, and if you do that, it'll kill this person. Okay, so that's your first option. Now, if you don't take that option, if you don't press the button to kill the stranger, the terrorist says, I will kill 5 other innocent people. So he's giving you a choice between pressing the button, which will kill 1 person but save 5, or not pressing the button, in which case you won't kill anyone, but he will kill 5. So take a moment to ask yourself what it is you think morality requires in this situation. What is the morally right thing to do? What's the morally wrong thing to do? Here's one thing you might think. You might think, well, morally, I'm required to kill this 1 person, as strange as that sounds, because if I don't, it's a certainty, and that's another assumption we need to have in place, is that it is certain that the terrorist will succeed in killing 5 others. But assume that if you don't do what he's asking you to do, he'll do what he threatens to do. So you might think, it's a certainty that he's going to kill 5 people if I don't kill 1, and it's worse to have 5 people die than 1. That's something, that just seems obvious, right? If I have a choice between 1 dying and 5, I should go with the 1. It sucks that I have to kill him, but that's better than this guy killing 5 people just as innocent as this 1 person. And so you might think the numbers matter, and so I think that what morality requires is that I do whatever prevents the most suffering, or whatever causes the most good. Maybe those 2 things are equivalent. Okay, on the other hand, you might think that that would be totally wrong to do that, and that what morality requires is that I not kill this 1 person, even though I know that that will cause 5 other people to die. Right? Here's why you might think that. You might think it's always wrong to kill. So if I kill this 1 person, I know that I'm doing something wrong. I'm doing that. It's true that that will result in the terrorist killing 5 people, but that's on him. Right? If he's going to do that, he will incur the charge that he is morally blameworthy for his actions. But that doesn't mean that the right thing for me to do is to kill somebody. Okay, so that's a totally different way of thinking about it. The reason I'm using this example is I want you to think about the implications that our judgments or intuitions on this case have more generally. Because if you think that with the first case, the reasoning there was something like, um, you know, I should kill the one person because that will prevent more harm. It's better to have one person die than 5. If you think that, one interesting implication right off the bat is that that means that there are cases where it's okay to kill. That means that it's not true that killing is always morally wrong. In fact, here's a case where killing is morally required of you, because you have to do it in order to save more people. So that would be an interesting implication if that were the right judgment about what morality requires in this case. But just more generally, if your rationale is something like, I need to prevent as many deaths as possible, so I can prevent 5 and only sacrifice 1, so I've saved 4 in effect. If you think that, if that's your thinking, then that probably means that more generally, your reasoning is what we'll call utilitarian or consequentialist. And we'll read John Stuart Mill later, who's a famous proponent of utilitarianism, who reasons just that way. He thinks that in general, not just in this terrorist case, but in our moral lives generally, just the way on a day-to-day basis, what's required of us is to always do whatever it is that will prevent the most suffering or create the most happiness or good. So it seems like somebody like John Stuart Mill, he has this general principle, right? It says, prevent suffering, bring about whatever state of affairs will result in the least suffering. Bring about whatever state of affairs will result in the most pleasure or happiness or good. And so he's going to have to say, because of that general theory, that in this case, the terrorist, or you must kill the one individual in order to prevent the terrorist from killing 5. On the other hand, Immanuel Kant, who we will also read, disagrees vehemently with that. His view, his general theory, has the implication that you must not kill the one, even though you know that will result in 4 more people dying than would die if you killed the one. We'll talk a lot more about that kind of thing later, but here's my point. Here's my reason for bringing all this up now. Okay? So it seems like there could be a general moral principle that we can appeal to arrive at a decision about how to act in this terrorist case. What moral philosophers of the kind we're going to be reading are doing is attempting to construct general theories of what's right and what's wrong. Theories that have implications for particular cases, even far-fetched cases like the one we're talking about now. But if one of these philosophers' theories is correct, then we'll know how to live, so to speak. We'll know what morality requires of us in various situations. So one of the things that we're going to be doing in this class is trying to figure out whose theory is right, if any of them are, and why they're right. So in the contrast between Kant and Mill and the implications their views have for the terrorist case, we can just say, are these theories generally right or wrong? If not, why? If so, why? So what are the reasons there are for thinking they're right or wrong? And are there any good arguments for thinking that Mill's right, for example, when he says, we must always do whatever brings about the most happiness or prevents the most suffering? Okay. That was really just to give you a flavor of what this course is all about. We're really not going to be talking about a lot of applied cases, like talking about terrorists and other crazy thought experiments and things like that. We won't be doing as much of that as we would in an applied ethics course or other kinds of philosophy classes. We're going to be focusing more on the general theories and only talking about cases intermittently. But I hope that served to give you some kind of flavor for what it is that moral philosophy is all about. Just in closing, I want to give you some pointers for how to succeed in this course. So, most importantly, always do the reading. Right? Don't ever get behind on the reading, not even by one day. It's extremely difficult to get students in general in a philosophy class to do all of the reading. I don't know why that is, but that's the way that it is, and that's going to be an even more serious problem in this course because, first of all, it's entirely online, which I think has an effect, and second, it's in an extremely short period of time. This class lasts less than 3 weeks, and we're doing just about an entire semester's worth of material. That means that you're doing, a week's worth of material in a day, and a lot more reading on any given day than you would on a normal day in a fall or spring semester. So I recognize it's going to be difficult to compel you to do all of the reading, but that is the number one recommendation I can give you for how to be successful in this course. Perhaps more obviously, make sure that you don't miss any assignments, right? Papers, quizzes, discussion posts, and don't think that just because the discussion posts are worth less of your grade that you can afford to miss many of them. But make sure also that those posts are substantial and insightful and equally successful to your success in the course. Equally important to your success in the course is using these posts as an opportunity to clarify confusion, getting answers from me or your fellow students on things that don't make sense. It's going to be important that you do that you wield advantage, you take advantage of that opportunity so that you're clarifying things and in a better position to perform well on the quizzes and papers. And speaking of papers, start working on them as early as possible. I know that it's going to be hard to get much of a head start on any of the paper assignments given the fact that this is a very short term and you're going to have papers at regular intervals, and so you're not going to be able to work on it like a week in advance, really, or anything that I might recommend during the fall or spring semester as a strategy for getting ahead. But what you can do is this. Ask yourself when you would naturally be inclined to start working on the paper in a term of this length, and then work on it a day earlier. I think that's a modest approach that would help you to have a pretty good shot of doing better on the paper than you otherwise would. Normally, writing papers at the last minute is a recipe for disaster, but I've made these short papers that aren't going to be very demanding, and so it will be possible to write them in one day and do pretty well, but you will definitely do better if you spend more time on it. Okay, and so I really do think that if you do all of these things, there's absolutely no reason not to do well in this course. I think it would be outrageous if you did everything on this slide and failed. It would also be outrageous if you really did everything on this slide and got a D. In fact, I think that if you really did everything that I have listed here and somehow managed to get a C, that would be surprising. Of course, I can't guarantee any particular grade in this course based on certain recommendations for how to, use your time and so forth. But I really feel like it's within each of your power to get an A or a B in this course just by doing the things I had up on that slide. I mean, when I say just, it's a little misleading. That's a significant amount of work to actually do all that stuff. But you're all totally capable of it, and I have high expectations for you. So I guess I've got one more video, and then we'll be done for the day. So I'm going to go ahead and upload this one, and then expect one more at some point today. I might take a little break. And incidentally, in future days, you can expect the videos to be posted a little bit earlier, usually in the morning. If it weren't for the setback that caused me to have to re-record all these individually, breaking them up and uploading them separately and all that, they would have been up earlier. So you can plan with the expectation that you'll be able to watch the videos in the morning, early afternoon, if that's your preference in the days to come. So, all right, thanks.